a very warm welcome. My name is Alexander Ritzmann. I'm a fellow with the German Council on Foreign Relations, co-creator of the InFoEx network, and the moderator of today's event, which has the title European Approaches to the Integration of Returnees from Syria and Iraq. We have 4 highly qualified and very interesting speakers from Belgium, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Germany. We are having actually live translation. So I will give you some housekeeping information on how to use the technology here in a second. My colleague Sophia Koller, who is also the head of this program, will introduce us all to the InfoEx network after the housekeeping. And she will share some of our previous work and findings. So, housekeeping-wise, the event is held in German and in English. Most of the time I will be speaking English, but I will also switch into German. All you have to do is go to the bottom of your screen and look for the globe sign and select a language that you prefer. If you're not happy with switching between English and German, so if you prefer to hear the whole event in English, please select English. If you prefer to hear the whole event in German, please select German. Don't do anything else, that's it. We have interpreters who will be very happy if we all speak slowly. So also don't wonder why I sometimes, if you know me a little bit, I tend to speak fast. This time I really try to be a bit slower. We have Jochen Sachse, our technician, our supporter here. If you have problems related to this webinar, please write them into the chat function. And Mr. Sachse will try to help you there. We have a Q&A function, obviously. And I would ask you to ask your questions whenever they pop up. So don't wait until the end of a presentation. If a question comes up, just write it into the Q&A, please. And also you can do that anonymously. If you don't like your name to be connected to the question, it's really anonymous. We also don't know then who was asking the question. An important feature here is also the upvoting function, meaning that if someone has asked the question that you would also have asked, but has done that already, you can upvote that question. That helps me prioritize later on with the questions that we will discuss in the Q&A section. So please use the upvoting function if you want to support somebody else's question, and you can also comment on the question of others. So that's for the housekeeping. Now we're going to start with my colleague Sophia Koller, who will introduce InfoEx and today's topic. Sophia.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexander. I will also try to speak slowly. I'm also the same candidate for speaking too quickly. Also from my side, a very warm welcome. And before we dive into the topic, as Alexander mentioned, I will quickly share my screen and introduce you to InfoEx. So I hope this works. Great. So InfoEx has been established in 2018. So we're actually working for a bit of a time right now. And it is a cooperation project with the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees, the BAMF, and it is funded by the Ministry of the Interior in Germany. And it has the overall objective of providing a space for trustful knowledge exchange for a network of the partners of the BAMF Advice Center and their civil society and government partners who are all working on tertiary prevention. In the context of InfoEx, we are referring to tertiary prevention, to all efforts to disengage, de-radicalize, decriminalize, and rehabilitate violent extremists with a focus on Islamist extremism, and both in a prison and in a society setting. So it's clear to, or it's important to make clear what we refer to when speaking about tertiary prevention. And what we do are basically three things. So first, together with the network, we identify what are relevant topics for their work on tertiary prevention in Germany. So what is it that they are interested in? What are the challenges that they're facing in their daily work? And keep in mind that the network is coming from policy, practice, and research. And then when we know what the topics are, we select international experts and invite them to our workshops so that together in a closed door workshop, together with the networks, the network partners and the international experts, we can discuss the challenges, but most importantly, the good practices that we have already identified. As I said, the workshops are closed door, so to provide this trustful setting, but we also want to share what we find out with the broader public. So we then process and communicate these findings in issue papers anonymously, but nevertheless to share these findings. And we publish them. You can also find them on our website. And they're published in both in English and in German. And some of the topics that we have discussed so far include the role of mental health, for example, risk assessment, evaluation, or recidivism. And one of the topics that we have also discovered is the reintegration of returnees from Syria and Iraq, and also the role of governmental actors working together with civil society. So based on the first public discussion that we had some month ago, we decided that we would really like to do an event that is covering both topics. So the reintegration of returnees from Syria and Iraq, but also the very specific challenges when it comes to governmental actors and agencies that are non-security actors. So this is the topic of today's event. And to bring something from our workshops to this setting as well, I would like to share some of the issues that we covered. So to make very sure that we're talking about the same thing, when we speak about returnees from Syria and Iraq, we speak about those that have radicalized in their home countries and then traveled to join terrorist organizations such as the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, and then have returned to their home countries. What's interesting here is that they have very different profiles and thus very different challenges. These individuals are men, women, but also small children that might have been born in Syria and Iraq. Some have returned disillusioned. Others are still highly radicalized. And for example, there's not always enough evidence for prison sentences. So it's also the question of having access to these individuals. And as I mentioned, the various actors involved dealing with this target group. And what we're talking about today is not only security agencies and counseling centers, but specifically the other actors from a governmental side. So penal institution, probationary services, social welfare and youth welfare office, but also those working in psychosocial care. And then lastly, maybe also because this is playing an important role, is that on this specific topic, there's a lot of public attention and it's politically very sensitive as a subject. And now, since we had a workshop on this topic, but it was closed door, I think it's even though interesting to share some of the insights that we discussed at that workshop to set a bit of a tone for the discussion today. So 3 insights that I personally found most interesting is that while tertiary prevention is very much about having individualized interventions, for today, I think it's really important to consider that it's about working together as a system. This means that the actors working together, they need a clarity of their roles and objectives. So who's working on what topic, when, with whom, having a clear understanding of what information can be shared. Is there a legal framework? But it's also important to have established institutional trust. So trust between, let's say a security agency, civil society, but also civil society and other kind of agencies, and also personal trust. So trust between individuals. This is something that needs time, but nevertheless is very important, also considering that the process of disengagement, de-radicalization, in some cases takes quite a long time. Second, building up expertise. So while the actors that we're talking about all have their specific expertise. They tend to lack expertise that is relevant for radicalization and violent extremism. So this is why it's important to identify who is lacking expertise, who would need some help, and also then be able to provide the relevant training. Thirdly, the question of effectiveness and transferability. So when we speak about de-radicalization, disengagement, it's always a very interesting and challenging question to evaluate, to assess, what works and why does it work. This is, I think, very difficult to find out, but still, especially with this target group, because it's a new challenge, there's not a lot of time that people have, for example, come back to still find out what works. And then second, think about how can we transfer the good practices that we have identified to another context. So to give you an example, we had the workshops, a researcher working on multi-agency cooperation in Nordic countries. And he said that while from outside, you might think that Nordic countries, such as let's say Denmark or Sweden and Finland, are quite similar. Actually, they're very different in terms of legal frameworks and also the level of trust between institutions. So let's say the police. And that's why even between these countries, it's very difficult to actually transfer one practice from one context to another context. And I think this demonstrates why it's really important to discuss good practices and then see how can we actually transfer them to another context and what does it mean. So without further ado, I'm very much looking forward to this discussion today. And maybe a final note from my side, we have a very high interest in this event, so we decided to record the first part, so the presentations of the speakers. But the second part, the Q&A part, will be on a Chatham House rule, meaning that you can you can share the information that has been said, but you cannot say who said it, so as to provide at least some sort of a safe space, while of course online this is more difficult to achieve than maybe in a normal workshop setting, but nevertheless this is what we want to achieve. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this event, and now I'm handing over to Alexander. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia, for this very comprehensive introduction, leading us to the core points here. We decided that we would like to offer you 2 case studies to start with. So two, let's say, approaches that show more or less the process, how individuals that have returned from the war theaters are being handled or should be handled with some challenges and good practices. And we will have the case studies from Belgium and from Germany. And I'm very happy that our dear friend and colleague, Thomas Renard, is back with us. Professor Renard is currently a senior research fellow at the Egmont Institute. That's the Royal Institute for International Relations, a think tank in Brussels. And he's an adjunct professor at the Vesalius College. His research focuses on counterterrorism and counter-radicalization in Belgium and Europe. He has published widely on the matter, has worked with the United Nations Security Council and other international bodies on this matter. So we're very eager, Thomas, to hear from you, your perspective on the situation in Belgium, on challenges and some insights regarding good practices. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Thank you very much, Sophia and DGAP for the invitation once again to participate to an InFoEx workshop. I'm very fond of the format, and apparently you haven't had enough of me. And as I said earlier, I'm going to claim my gold membership card, but okay, you will hear about this later. So what I will do indeed is try to brush very quickly through the trajectory of a returnee once back in Belgium in prison and after prison, and through that process highlight cooperation between different services, including security and non-security services. And the first thing that I wanted to highlight is the fact that there are already mechanisms of cooperation between different services even prior to return in the case of Belgium. Whether it is in the case of risk assessment, we have an all sources risk assessment through our Counterterrorism Fusion Center, or whether it comes to sort of the process leading to repatriation. We have an agreement between different administrations and services, a procedure, if you will, to make sure that these returns happen in a controlled and safe manner. So it already starts there. But I will not say much more than that, but just to flag this already. Upon return, the other thing that I wanted to flag before highlighting the whole trajectory is that upon return, in the case of Belgium, all returnees now go to prison because they have all been convicted in absentia. So that's also a difference, I think, with some other European countries. That's not always been the case with previous returnees, but it's become the rule, it's become systematically the case that all returnees are sent to prison since around 2015. So that's already been quite some time. So then what happens in prison and after prison with regard to these returnees? Well, in prison, what you need to understand is Belgium is a federal state. And so we have this interesting division of labor and competences between different layers of the government. And in Belgium concretely, that means that the security aspects are being mostly dealt at the federal level by federal services, whereas the personal or individual support accompaniment is a competence of the federated entities, mostly and mainly Flanders and Wallonia. So when it comes to detention regime, for instance, so deciding who, where returnees go, in which prison, which unit, which specific security measures must be taken, that is mostly done by something that we have in our penitentiary, federal penitentiary administration called SELEX, which is the unit for extremism, which was created in 2015, which is a little bit like, it's not really the case, but it's a little bit like a fusion center within the penitentiary administration. And the point is that various information from intelligence services, prison staff, psychosocial services merged together within that unit, within SELEX, which can then make an informed assessment of the inmate and then make recommendations for detention regime, which are then implemented by regional prison directors. So that's already a form, if you will, of multi-agency approach cooperation between different services for assessment and detention regime. When it comes to rehabilitation or disengagement, on the other hand, that is a competence of the federated entities, and that's actually relatively recent. That used to be used not to be the case, but that is the case since we have returnees from Syria, and there are some commonality, but also some differences between the different approaches in Flanders and Wallonia. The commonalities is that disengagement programs are being offered on a voluntary basis. And that's also sometimes different in different countries, but they are offered on a voluntary basis. And they are multidisciplinary in their approach. That means that in Belgium, we do speak rather of disengagement as opposed to de-radicalization. But the point is that there will be a multidisciplinary team that will be available to the detainee, to the returnee, and they will try to basically open several doors, and they will then go into the door that the returnee is most receptive. So that can be religion, but that can also be psychological support, that can be also social support. So we can have a very traditional rehabilitation and reinsertion program, or we can have a much more what we would call de-radicalization program. But at the same time, because this is a competence of the federated entities, you can have different sensibilities or different approaches between Flanders and Wallonia. That has indeed been the case, because these are different administrations doing that. However, since 2019, there has been a sort of agreement, a circular, a joint note of the different regions with the federal government to make sure that at the very least we have at a certain level a common approach, even though that can be implemented in different manners. So we have worked on that. So this rehabilitation program is voluntary, so not everyone has to participate, but of course it is usually positively perceived if you participate to these programs. So then you never really know whether returnees participate to these programs because they really want to, or because they want an early release. That can play, of course, in their assessment for an early release. And that is something that we need to take into account. And there's obviously in the background, the whole discussion, the whole reflections that we have with various incidents that we have seen in Europe about those people faking takia and so on and so on. So that's also obviously part of the background reflections in Belgium. And then after that, you have the post-penitentiary approach. When time of release comes, there the preference in Belgium is the release under probation. So the idea is that as much as possible, returnees will be released before the end of the sentence under a probation mandate. Probation policy here again is a federated competence, a competence of the federated entities. And again, it's also part of this circular from 2019 that I mentioned earlier, which tries to smooth cooperation between the federal level penitentiary administration and the probation services, houses of justice, social services, to make sure that there is a smooth transition from prison to post-prison, and that information is also shared to the best extent possible. That, for instance, also a reinsertion plan is prepared even before the decision for probation is being made, so that basically we have as much as possible an integrated approach to rehabilitation in prison and after prison. But of course, it's a recent agreement, so sometimes it can still be improved on the margins. Probation measures can include, again, disengagement, judiciary measures, police measures, social measures, psychological support, etc., etc. And the last point that I will make, because I see that I'm reaching the end of my time, is that sometimes, of course, some returnees may not benefit from probation because they're not eligible or because they make the decision not to be released under probation. That's also their choice. But even then, even if it's not a probation, there are different mechanisms that exist for continuing monitoring and supporting returnees after their release or after their probation. And we have in Belgium a system of a double platform, two tables, if you will. There is a security-driven platform and a social or psychosocially driven platform. One is called the local task force, and it's basically a platform through which the security services meet and discuss the cases of returnees after their release from prison. So they exchange information about risk assessment and specific measures that should be taken, security measures that should be taken with regard to these returnees. And then we have a social, psychosocial platform, which is basically meetings of local prevention officers, the mayor, local police, local education services, local social services, and so on. And they can also discuss the case of these returnees and also discuss specific measures that should be taken, including should we offer that person further psychosocial support? Can we help that person reintegrating, re-socializing, finding an apartment, finding a job? How can we support that person? And there is a link between these two platforms between the security platform and the social platform. There is a person that participates to both platforms to make sure that the information circulates well between these platforms. That's also very important. That wasn't the case early on. So that is something that we've learned. And that was a lesson that we've learned from the past. And to conclude, information sharing is key. That's really a lesson in the case of Belgium. The smooth sharing of information, transfer of information between the different services, security and non-security, federal and non-federal, all the way to the local level. We have set up different mechanisms. I can talk more about that if you will in the Q&A. But we have made a lot of efforts in Belgium to make sure that information is transferred smoothly, timely between the different services in spite of the institutional complexity of the country. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. This was very insightful, very practical. Thank you, very useful, I think. Also, since Belgium is a federal state, similar and different to Germany, for us Germans, it's always good to hear that others also have complex structures to deal with, which our French friends sometimes might not necessarily be, understanding automatically. So thank you for that. Somebody asked a question in the chat window, which gives me the opportunity to please ask everyone to use the Q&A or FNR in the function here. The chat is more for technical issues, but since it is just a quick question, the question was if those sentenced in absentia were these men and women, or also was everyone sentenced, or were there subcategories?
Yes, so now in the case of Belgium, it's everyone who is being convicted in absentia, everyone who's an adult, obviously. So that is not the case for children, obviously. But every adult, men and women, yes. Okay. This is the case for, I think since 2015 or 16, almost every single woman returnee or still there has been convicted. So okay. We don't make a distinction anymore.
Thank you for that. I think there will be lots of interest in discussing that approach later on. We're going to move on now. We had the thought that we have the series of inputs more at the beginning and then really a lot of time to have a big group discussion between the experts and of course between the participants, if you like to, by using the Q&A window. So thank you, Thomas, for that. I am going to switch now into German, weil wir den Herrn...
Because we're going to have Mr. Manovich. Mr. Alexei Manovich is with us today. He is the an employee of the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees, and he's working in the counseling or advice center on radicalization. Mr. Manovich has studied social work and psychology, and he was working in the accepting drug support. And then he was also working in the psychiatry sector, and then he used his expertise for case management, advice, and counseling and group therapies. And since 2016, he's been working at the Advice Center at Radikalisierung. He is working at the hotline of this Advice Center, and he's also working on individual cases in the framework of the risk management. Mr. Manovich has prepared a presentation containing a case study from his point of view. That means the point of view of the BAMF, Federal Office for Migration and Refugees, and himself. And Ms. colleague Miriam will start to share her screen with Mr. Manovich's presentation. The stage is yours, Alexander.
Sie müssten Ihr Mikro noch freischalten.
Alexei, you should unmute your microphone. Now. Much better. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for this introduction. I would like to present a case to you that actually consists from several cases that have entered our center over years. and we needed different cooperation partners to solve this case or these cases. Before that, let me tell you what we're doing at the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees, the BAMF. Next slide, please. The Advice Center is a bit more than just a hotline, as you can see right here. So this is our structure. We have people in the project management, people who are supporting projects. We also have a federal coordination and interface point or unit, which gives us an interface also to the world of science. And we're trying to cover the most relevant professions with our center. So we also have lawyers and so on and so forth in our advice center. We're cooperating with a federal network of advisors and counselors. These are the different units or advice centers who are part of that project. And so we're making not only acquisition here, and we cooperate with the federal security authorities as well when it comes to the prevention of extremism. If you're interested in this network of advisors and counselors, please contact me privately, because I would like to go on with the integrated case that we have been dealing with and which I would like to present to you. First of all, we have a project that is called the Coordination of Returnees, which contains several projects from different federal German states. We're trying to focus in this project to coordinate the returnees from different countries, as I said, and we're putting up network structures, and we're also checking for possibilities how to approach these people. So what they need, which demands they have, which special networks could be used, and which individual persons could be also approached. We also have different advising and counseling services. And you see, we have to cooperate even beforehand, so before a returner really comes back, and we take care of him or her. Therefore, next slide, please, first of all. What we classically have made within the last year is the following structure. So we usually have people who were born here. So let me give you one of the cases. First, M was born in '94 in Germany, in the southwestern European area. He or she has some contacts and ties, is Muslim, but does not practice Muslim. And then she started radicalizing and also has a child from her first marriage from Syria. Now let's skip a bit forward. Let's go fast forward. The history is not untypical, so it usually happens several times in the biography of refugees. So in 2016, this person goes to Syria, is being then trying to refrain from that network, then is detained and flees from that detention, going to Turkey, and then is being deported from Turkey. The deportation from Turkey to Germany had to be secured, of course. That means everything. We had to ascertain that this is the actual person that shall be deported, and that this person has a German origin or is of German origin. And then we first of all have to make a biographical work. That means asking notaries and civil registries whether this person is already known as a German citizen. And if everything is proven and this person can come back to Germany, this person is really returned to our country, so deported back to Germany. Next slide. And this is the situation or the area where a lot of structures have to cooperate with each other. There are various levels and structures. Well, we can more or less split that up into the social sector, so to say, and the security sector. And as we've heard, Germany is a federal state, so we have a lot of security agencies, and everything that happens in the youth welfare offices has a local responsibility or municipal responsibility, but other units have superordinated responsibilities. Civil registries in Germany, for instance, are organized a bit different. They are tied up locally. They do not have an umbrella organization with which we could cooperate. Therefore, we have to cooperate individually with all the respective civil registries. Then there is another level which I've called security agencies and psychosocial offers, and also the justice sector is one of them, where of course lawsuits are being used to check for data, also to check whether a person is responsible and able to understand his or her responsibility and accountability. And this is of course also very decisive when it comes to the question what will happen to such a person. And first of all, usually we have people in investigative detention, where we first of all check whether they are stating a threat to society. And then after having clarified whether such a person has to stay in jail or not, we also can give them an apartment or a place to stay, first of all, and then advice or counseling partners. They also need a healthcare insurance. So this is a very practical level, so to say, a lot of teeny tiny baby steps which we bureaucratically have to take. And then so we actually have a look at the person in her or his current situation. And these are the obstacles, first of all, to check who that person is and what they need. So sometimes these people even have resources like family members. Maybe they even have some unit like the disengagement agency whom they wish to cooperate with. And there are other units who systematically can accept responsibility for such a person. If a probation or if the sentence is set on probation of such a person after the conviction, we have to start coordinating some larger and smaller stories, so to say, for this person. Next slide. Now, this is the cooperation or with the respective units, and that I have tried to summarize for you because it's very important to understand that such a person has to understand what to do with her or his life after the probation period. They have to stabilize, and they also need a person accompanying the process of disengagement. And in this area, we're trying to work on an individual approach basis. That means that we're checking who has the best relation from all these entities to the respective person in order to cooperate closer with that person. So is it the advice center for instance, or the De-Radicalization and Disengagement Center, or sometimes we also use case managers for this kind of thing. Or sometimes it's also the probation caretaker who is the better person to ask for such a service, for such an accompanying service. So we're trying to, as I said, decide on an individual level and check which advice center or unit is the best one to support. Sometimes we also have regional coordination units in the respective states. They can do such a service and offer it, and sometimes they should even. But as you can see, we need a network, a customized network that has to be adapted to the needs of every single returnee. And this whole network has to, well, tackle the issue of reintegration, so to say. As far as this good practice, when it comes to this best practice example, now you've heard what we're doing first with that person and how we are focusing on their special needs. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Manovich. And thank you for this very easy to comprehend, this presentation that was easy to comprehend, to give us these little steps as a procedure. We have a little question for you. After Thomas said that we also have people who are convicted in absentia if they are leaving the country to join the IAS, for instance. How is the situation in Germany? Well, in Germany, the situation is the following. As far as I know, there is no conviction in absentia of the respective people. So we are actually waiting until these persons return and really can be present in court. And then the court decides which proof has to be submitted if in order to make such a person go on probation or to detention, to jail. Sometimes it's really hard to prove, to be frank, that they did something that is actually relevant or subject to legal conviction or persecution. Yes, exactly. So we're going to talk about one more thing later on, which is, well, being deported or, well, leaving the country. We're going to come back to the topic in a second. Thank you, first of all, for your presentation.
We had two very interesting and insightful case studies now. One from a research perspective, one from a government practitioner perspective. And now we're very happy that we have two colleagues who will comment on these studies and also, of course, add their own experiences and insights and comments to what they heard, but also from their own daily work. Our next expert is Matti van der Molen. She studied children's psychology, worked as a behavioral expert at the Child Protection Board for 20 years now. Since August 2017, she has coordinated 117 return plans that were made by the Children Protection Board for children who might one day possibly return to the Netherlands. The return plans were made in close cooperation with the families. She also works with, and she's the coordinator of the National Advisory Team on minor returnees. And she's also doing long-term scientific research on Dutch and Flemish minor returnees. So the whole aspect of minors is very interesting and very relevant, of course, and very complex. So we're very happy that you're here. Matti, please share your insights with us. You would have to unmute yourself.
That helps. Thank you. I was saying thank you for inviting me to your meeting. It's always interesting. First of all, I would like to comment on what we heard so far from the best practices. I think it's very recognizable for the Netherlands that information is being shared, and there is cooperation between psychosocial partners and security partners, also on a national level and on a regional level. We also do this in the Netherlands, and I also heard the second speaker say that they cooperate before the return, before they actually return, and at the moment of return and afterwards, which is what we also do and which is really recommendable. I think the information sharing is, I think, is key in all of this. Information sharing between multidisciplinary partners, because I see in my job that we learn a lot from security partners about the mothers, the fathers, in how they educated their children. And on the other hand, they hear a lot from us, what happened over there and through the children, which is natural. When you work together, this integrates. I also hear say that it's important to find the best unit, to find a port of entry for reintegration of individuals. And I hear you speak about the nearby future. Now, I want to take a look at the nearby future, what we need to do for children when they return. And I also want to take a leap in the future, what we need to do on the longer term. Actually, trauma is the most important thing in the life of these children. Children who are suffering from early childhood traumatization have experienced a situation, consciously or not consciously, that has seriously frightened them and that has set off the alarm bells in their brains. This does not mean that every situation that they have been through or that they have been exposed to in Syria was immediately traumatizing. A frightening situation only has a traumatizing effect on a child when this child, there's no mother or father who can regulate the emotions that the child is feeling at the moment. Now, this is important to know because what we need to do for these children who have been through repeatedly through situations that were frightening for them and there was no reassurance to them that everything would be fine, what is actually happening to them is that they will not develop enough confidence in the world and in self-esteem that you can trust on yourself. Now, this sets a blueprint for children with early childhood trauma. The world is not a safe place to be in, and there is no one there to protect you. Traumatized children will feel a constant anxiety of the reoccurrence of danger, and they will be constantly alert of what will happen to them in the world surrounding them. So on the short term, what these children will need are adults who are 24/7 emotionally and physically available and predictable, no matter what happens, no matter what they do, who will always be there, who will help them articulate and understand the intentions of their coping behaviors, and who will help them regulate their emotions. Thus, their blueprint of the world as an unsafe place can partly be replaced by the image that although the world sometimes may be frightening to them, there is always someone there that you can rely on. Now, if we don't teach minor returnees to understand their own coping behaviors and how to regulate their emotions, we should be probably prepared for serious behavioral problems on a later stage in life. Now, this is a challenge for the short term. But when we look at the longer term, what are the challenges then? And I would like to take a leap to specifically puberty and adolescence, two critical stages in lives of children. As we all know, puberty can be a confusing and very challenging phase in the lives of children. I don't know, some of you may be parents of teenagers. Well, it's quite a difficult job. But what makes it so challenging? In puberty, we start to wonder with whom we want to measure ourselves and even with whom we absolutely don't want to measure ourselves. But what if you don't have positive role models in your life? Or maybe you do have possible role models. You have parents that you love and you cherish, but you experience that your positive role models are not seen so positively by society. I think this may be very confusing to our minor returnees, who will probably have a struggle during puberty in developing their own identity. During adolescence, we explore who we want to become as adults. We are exploring which role we want to take when we become adults, what ideals we want to stand for in life, how we can be of any importance to the world we live in. But what if you feel judged by society, if you feel that the choices and parents of your parents are not agreed upon by society, how can you then determine what role to play in society, and how can you be of value to society? Minor returnees may possibly have a struggle during adolescence with finding their role in society and finding purpose in their lives. Not having this will make them very vulnerable to negative influences from outside. This is why I think it's important that we not only focus on the current needs of minor returnees, but also take a leap to the future and what they may possibly need during critical phases later in life, and how we can already anticipate on that. For instance, if we hypothetically can foresee that minor returnees in the future might possibly have difficulty in developing their identity and finding their own role, what should we already be thinking of, what we can do for them? How can we already help them to develop sufficient self-esteem, sufficient confidence in the people and the world around them in order to become more resilient? How can we help them find social embedding, help them find multiple positive role models in their lives? For instance, religion, family, friends. This requires investment of support for minor returnees and their caretakers for a longer period of time. I think it might be a pitfall to stop offering support and guidance for minor returnees on a short term when we think that they are okay. Firstly, because trauma symptoms tend to occur years later. And secondly, because it can be quite difficult to motivate a teenager to accept professional help when he or she is at its weakest and does not feel the need to discuss his or her emotions at all with anybody. It will be quite difficult to reach them then. So therefore, I would make a plea to support these children for a longer term and keep investing in them, even if we think that they are doing okay. And in the meanwhile, I think when we're talking about rehabilitation and reintegration, I think we should send out a message that reintegration is not something that only these children, these mothers and these fathers have to do, but it really is not a one-way street, but a two-way street. We also need society to offer them new chances in life. Well, that's actually what I wanted to contribute.
Thank you, Matti. This was very insightful, very practical. And I think also with some positive insights that I think colleagues that are attending this webinar, this event today, can actually work with, from policymakers to practitioners. So thank you for that. I noted down a couple of questions, but we'll have the Q&A session later, which reminds me to remind everyone, please, to use the Q&A window. People are posting questions in the chat. The chat is for the technical issues. The Q&A window, and I'm not just being very German here, it's just very useful to have the Q&A window because you can vote on questions that others have posed to help rank which questions we will later on discuss. So please just copy paste what you've asked in the chat and put it in the Q&A, or in German, the F and R window, so we can have a diverse discussion later on. So thank you again, Matti. very, very insightful and helpful. So now we're coming to the last speaker, a colleague from Denmark, Stefan Nielsen, who has been working with multi-agency solutions in Danish crime prevention since the 90s. Among many other things, crime prevention related, he is one of the fathers of the Aarhus model, which many of us know to a degree at least, a method for preventing radicalization and violent extremism in a collaboration between police, municipal authorities, and local communities. He's also helping developing and running programs for exit from organized crime, and he is chairman of the Youth Crime Council in the East Jutland Police District. He works at the city of Aarhus, and he is an advisor to the East Jutland Police. So, Stefan, please share your insights with us, comment on what was said before, and add your own ideas.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be in so distinguished company. I listened to the three previous speakers, and I can really see our own interventions and our own organization in it. So if I were just to tell you about that, it would probably be very much a repetition of much that have already been said. So I'll try to put it into perspective instead of in terms of what we're doing. We've been working with the Aarhus model since 2007, and if you would like to know more about the Aarhus model, I'm getting arrogant on my old days, so just Google it. In terms of foreign fighters, we have a history of working with foreign fighters in the Aarhus model since 2012, where the first people left for the conflict in Syria and Iraq. At that time, it was very much about preventing people leaving, and it was very much about integrating people who came home. It wasn't illegal at the time to leave for a conflict zone for a Danish citizen or a Danish resident. So it was very much outside the penal system to work with them. Everything was voluntary. Due to changing legislation, I'll get back to that, and international circumstances, there's sort of a before and after the rise of Islamic State. It has become more about exit from extremist environments and reintegration after prison time served, the work that we're doing today. It might be interesting to hear something about the legal basis of what we're doing. It wasn't illegal for the first foreign fighters to leave for a conflict zone, but from 2000 and there was, as Alexei said, there was very much a problem with proof, for instance, for any transgressions conducted in the conflict zone. We were limited to telling people that we were working with who came home that if we ever hear about them doing war crimes or joining a terrorist organization, we would prosecute them. But it was more or less empty threats because it's very difficult to prove anything that's happened in a conflict zone. Not a uniquely Danish problem, that's a very international problem. From 2015, the government passed a law that made it possible to confiscate passports for people suspected of leaving for conflict zones. As practitioners, our gut reaction was that this is not a very good idea. You'll just make people madder. You'll just create your own. You'll just push to the frustration that makes them radicalized in the first place. But after we started working with it, we actually found positive ways of using it, stopping people from leaving to Syria with large amount of money while we were still stopping the money flow and could still work with them at the same time. So it's more about using the law and the regulation in a constructive manner. From 2016, the Danish government solved the proof problem by just making it illegal to travel to conflict zones. They designated 7 or 8 international conflict zones. Iraq and Syria was one of the conflict zones. So now you would be prosecuted, and you are being prosecuted. We have people being prosecuted and put sentenced and put to jail just for being there. If you can prove that they have joined a terrorist organization, that will just add to the sentence. What we're actually doing with it is multi-agency cooperation, just like very much like the previous speakers have described it. We have a representative from municipal departments for social service, employment, schools, education, outreach workers, social psychiatry, together with the local police, meeting every 2 weeks to do risk assessment on new cases and coordinate whatever that department, the different departments have to do. Or multi-agency work does not always mean coordinated work, so we're trying our best to do that. The legal basis for that is that we have a clause in the Civil Rights Act that allows us to exchange information between municipality and police in crime-related cases and in the interest of preventing crime. And once we, in 2007, defined risk of radicalization as risk of crime, problem solved, we could use that clause. The prison service participates when required. Not all cases are about people who are serving time or finished serving time. In order not to waste anyone's time, we only invite them when necessary. There's no intelligence service around the table either. If the risk assessment indicates it, we of course informs the intelligence service about it. And we have a collaboration with them to some extent. We get cases from them as well. If they have someone they're concerned about, but do not have enough information to prosecute them, we get them as preventive cases. In terms of families, we always try to involve families as part of the solution if possible. Sometimes the families are the problem if you have radicalization in the family, and family is the radicalizing factor. We've had instances where teenagers were being trained as mujahideen in Denmark, and we've had to solve them. But we try as much as we can to use families as a resource rather than just a form of a source of information. We always try to activate them in the exit programs. There's a running dialogue with mosques, outreach to especially Salafi-based mosques, and they are involved as part of the solution if it's relevant and if it's possible. There's an infamous mosque where most of the Syrian or the foreign fighters who went to Syria attended, and we had a collaboration with that mosque in order to stem the flow, and that was part of stemming the flow to Syria, Iraq. We have an exit program that tries to help people out from extremist environments, and it's based on our experiences with the exit program from organized crime as well. So, and that has basically the same principles: security, housing, and income, and a new network, and on top of that, health issues, both mentally and physical health. So these are sort of the teaser headlines. If anyone would like to know more, just use the Q&A, and thank you.
Thank you, Steffen. That was very insightful. The Aarhus model has been around and has been discussed and looked at for quite a while now. It is police-led, right? So the police is like the spider in the center of the web, maybe. Not maybe the best picture, but the one that came to my mind. And this leads to already questions of like transferability. What kind of cultural or traditions or legal frameworks do you need for the police to be, for example, in the center of this kind of preventive part of your work is preventive, the other is repressive, the other is dealing with returnees. So I'm looking forward to discussing this later on. It has been a very good, like a beacon for orientation, the Aarhus model, but it is difficult to transfer lessons learned. And this also leads me now, thank you all for your insightful impacts and inputs. And I'm also thanking the participants for using the Q&A window and also for voting on the questions they seem most relevant. And the most relevant at the moment is, we always talk about best practices. How about sharing failed or inadequate practices? Now, in my context of work, there are no best practices. Best practice would be there's one way to do something in a best possible way, which is would usually need independent evaluations, first of all. Best case formative evaluations. Then you would have to see what of this can actually be transformed. So in my work environment, I prefer good practices, or if I'm not even sure if they really work, inspiring practices. This is also something that the Radicalization Awareness Network usually uses. So we moved away from the best practice. There might be a best way to operate on a broken arm if it's done in a specific way, but in terms of PCVE, that seems not to be the case. So you need a safe space usually, I guess, to have the opportunity to share things that didn't go so well. And this is something that InFoEx, our network, for example, aims at in some of the workshops, right? So if you open the books to things that didn't go as planned, you need to make sure that this does not cause major problems to you. So I think I'm actually answering, obviously, this question because it is key to our work as well, that we need to build safe spaces and transparency to a degree, but also some sort of protection for those who share what didn't work, because it seems also that we humans pay more attention what didn't work than what has the golden ribbon and the golden medal to it.